If you've been following along on this YouTube channel or on fireinabottle.net or on r/saturatedfat on Reddit or on the fire_bottle Twitter feed, you'll know that I've been talking a lot about reducing protein intake and specifically reducing branched chain amino acid intake. And that means isoleucine, leucine, and valine. This week on r/satfat, user SpringBear8 organized a weight loss trial doing a super low branched chain amino acid restricted diet for weight loss purposes, and the trial results were impressive. If you go to fireinabottle.net and click on the how much protein do you need, there's the link to the trial results. You should go check that trial out, get involved on r/saturatedfat. Needless to say, the low protein aspect has raised some eyebrows on Twitter. Questions like, are you concerned about losing muscle mass? And so the question is, how much protein does an adult human actually need to maintain muscle mass? And this was actually determined quite accurately by the early 1970s. And so I went back and I looked at one of these papers just so that people can have an idea of what should be enough protein. So for the Emergence diet, which is my version of a branched chain amino acid restricted diet, I laid out a plan where the maximum sort of daily protein budget was the equivalent of about 6 ounces of lean meat, and that a lot of the protein in this diet would come from sources of collagen like gelatin, bone broth, beef tendon, pork rinds. And what the study actually found, and you can see here the 7E plus diet of Weller, and we're gonna step through that diet in a second. We're gonna go through that PDF. But this 7E plus diet, the men on this diet, these were 6 young men, were in protein balance, and so this diet provided sufficient protein. And in this column, I have the amount of protein that you would get from, or the amount of specifically amino acids. And so proteins are made out of amino acids, and some of the amino acids are essential, meaning that the human body can't make them, and some are non-essential, meaning that you can make some amino acids from other amino acids as long as you have enough nitrogen. And so this is 3 eggs per day plus 30 grams of gelatin or collagen or protein from bone broth in this column. And what you'll see is that these numbers are really very equivalent. The 3 eggs plus 30 grams gelatin is a bit low in cysteine. And one of the things that I recommend supplementing on this diet is N-acetylcysteine. So that's actually a really good source of supplemental cysteine, and it will help you build glutathione. But other than that, the 3 eggs plus 30 grams of gelatin pretty much gives you your daily protein needs according to this study that we're going to step through in a minute. And these are the non-essential amino acids. And what they did in that study, or in some of those earlier studies by Rose, was most of the non-essential amino acids were supplied by glutamic acid, glycine, and alanine. And it just so happens that those are the 3 most common amino acids in gelatin and in collagen. This diet in total, interestingly, is almost the exact same amount of protein as in the this 7E diet that was proved to be protein sufficient in young men, and that's about 44 grams of protein in both cases. And I point out in this study that this is from a 1955 paper by George Mann, and they went to Nigeria and they study the diets of Nigerian tribes. And so this is the Igbo culture, and their staples are yam and cassava. And so those tropical tubers are very high in starch, low in protein. And I've been recommending especially cassava on this diet. Cassava is a great, it's delicious. It's a huge source of carbohydrates. And what you can see is that their total protein of this tribe in Nigeria is 46 grams of protein, and they're getting about 20 of it from animal sources. And so this, ironically, is a very similar diet to a very similar overall protein supply as to this diet that I recommended with the 3 eggs plus the 30 grams of gelatin. And we saw that in a natural living human culture. So here's that paper. You can see Weller, Calloway, and Margin. This was 1971. They're at Berkeley. So they took 6 healthy men and they actually kept them in a metabolic ward for 81 days. So this is a very long experiment. You'll see a bunch of different diets in this. Some of them have R's in them. Some of them have E's. They've got different numbers, 3.5 or 7. And so anytime you see it, we're going to focus on the diets that end in E. Those are the ones where the protein, the amino acid pattern that they gave them was based on the same amino acid balance as in egg whites. And so in this diet, they're feeding them all purified amino acids. So they're not actually eating egg whites. They're just eating the amino acids required to make those proteins. Amino acids are very absorbable, digestible. So not all proteins are equally digestible, and not all individuals are equally as good at digesting protein. And so take that into account. What they say is the diets provide either 3.5 or 7 grams of total amino acid nitrogen. And on average, that conversion is 1 gram of nitrogen from amino acids is the equivalent of about 6.25 grams of protein. So this diet providing 3.5 grams of amino acid nitrogen has about 22 grams of total protein in it. And this diet with 7 grams has about 44 grams of total protein in it. And that's what I just showed you on the blog article over at fireinaBottle.net, was that 7E plus diet had about 44 grams of total protein. And it says nitrogen balance was achieved with the E pattern when tryptophan was 330 milligrams and the total nitrogen was 44 grams a day. The trial has 6 healthy men aged 21 to 31 years participated in the 81-day experiment. And every day they did 30 minutes of walking up a 10% grade at 3 miles an hour on a treadmill, plus an additional 15 minutes of running up a 10% grade at 5 miles an hour. This is the experimental design. You can see for 9 days, they consumed 0 nitrogen in the lead-in diet. And so that's so that they can determine how much nitrogen people actually excrete when they don't take in any nitrogen, right? So you can get an idea of how much nitrogen is actually lost every day. Then they put them on these minimal diets that were only 22 grams of protein a day based on slightly different amino acid proteins. Like I say, we're going to focus on the egg white based proteins. Then they put them on and so this is 9 days on 0 protein, 9 days on 3.5E, and then another 12 days on these slightly different versions of the diet, or they're actually switching them back and forth here to see what happens. Then 9 more days on, this is like 75 grams of protein to make sure they can replenish any protein that they lost in the early part of this experiment. And then they switch them over for another quite a while, right? A bunch of days onto these diets to give them 45 grams of protein or 44 grams of protein. This is the delightful diet that they were fed while they were in this metabolic ward. The amino acids were all given in these kind of like these beverages, these slurry drinks. And in addition to that, they were fed this quick bread, which was raw wheat starch, sucrose, safflower oil, salt-free, milk-free margarine, glycerol, and ammonium carbonate. So that sounds delightful. These are the 6 men. You can see here's their ages. Most of them are actually between 21 and 25. And they're quite lean. Their average BMI is about 20.9 if you do the math on that. And their metabolic rates are quite high. This is 70 pounds.
Kilograms.
150 pound man, roughly, maybe a little more, is consuming 3,000 calories a day. And so this is total nitrogen balance here. And so these guys given 0 nitrogen or given 0 protein in their diet, they were excreting about 17.8 grams, 2.85 grams of nitrogen, which would be the equivalent of about 17.8 grams of dietary protein. In theory, if they only lose about 18 grams of protein, without any nitrogen, their daily protein requirement should be about 18 grams. When you actually give them that much nitrogen, it's not all 100% utilized effectively, and you can see that the amount released in urine goes from 2.5 up to 3.06. So as you feed them more nitrogen is lost. And so they don't quite come up to nitrogen balance yet. So with this 3.5E, they're still losing about 2.2 grams dietary equivalent protein per day. They doubled it to this 7E. So this is 44 grams of protein, but it's still, it's not super high yet in essential amino acids. And so on the 7E plus, they increased essential amino acids by another third. So it's the same amount of total protein, but they gave them more essential amino acids by a little bit. And this is the diet that I reported in the fireinabottle.net on the blog. And so this diet gave them actually a positive nitrogen balance equivalent of about 3 grams of protein a day. And so they were actually gaining muscle mass. The reason that I have these two men highlighted is that you can see their urinary excretion is lower on the 3.5 diet. That's the one that only gives them 22 grams of protein. And so these two men were actually in protein balance with only the 22 grams of dietary protein. And number 2 didn't show up for work that day. So that's 2 out of 5 men were in protein balance on only that 22 grams of protein, which is pretty interesting in my opinion. And so we're back on Fire in a Bottle again. You can see this highlighted in yellow is the Weller diet. This is the diet that kept all 6 men in positive protein balance. This is my sort of proposed minimum: 3 eggs plus 30 grams of gelatin. As I've said, if people want to do the emergence diet, I strongly encourage them to be in protein balance, but you don't need to go really much over that protein balance. The data suggests that this is kind of enough. And again, you can see these are all the essential amino acids. You can see they are all sufficient in this diet of 3 eggs plus 30 grams of gelatin protein, except perhaps cysteine and tyrosine and phenylalanine are a bit low. So you could add a 4th egg to this if you want. Without a big problem, but that seems to be, but something like 44 grams of protein with about half of that protein coming from very high quality sources like eggs, meat, or dairy protein, and the rest coming from sources like collagen or gelatin seem to get you to a state of, seems like it would get most humans to a state of protein sufficiency. There are some instances where this might not be the case, such as if you're pregnant or if you're nursing, if you're an older human who suffers from sarcopenia, which is age-related muscle loss. If you are doing a lot of really anabolic workouts, and you're trying to bulk up muscle, perhaps protein sparing is not the diet for you. I think that goes without saying, but I said it anyway. Generally speaking, though, that 44 grams seems to be a pretty safe number.